You're not stupid. How to fix your attention span. Understanding your win criteria. Here's a list of the most common tips you'll find on YouTube for fixing your attention span. But here's the hard truth: if you're relying on these tips, chances are you won't actually fix your attention span or focus. And it's not because these tips don't work, it's because they're just band-aid solutions. You'll probably be back on YouTube tomorrow, maybe a week later, or at the very latest, a month from now, searching for the same advice all over again. I don't want that for you. In this video, I'm going to give you something better than a band-aid. I'm going to give you the cure. We'll focus on foundational principles for improving focus and dealing with distractions, principles that are backed by science. The first step to truly fixing your attention span is understanding what I call your win criteria. A win criteria is basically what has to happen for you to achieve success. Think of it like playing chess: you win if you checkmate your opponent or if they forfeit. When it comes to focus and attention span, most people set the wrong win criteria. They assume that using a tip or technique and being able to concentrate for a little while means they've succeeded. That's not how it works. Let me explain with a personal example. Years ago, when I started working out, I focused on lifting heavier and heavier weights. But I wasn't paying attention to my form. As a result, I ended up hurting my wrists and shoulders. To deal with the pain, I started using wrist wraps. Then I added stretches to improve my posture. But my form never really improved, so I kept injuring myself. Over time, I needed even thicker wraps, Tiger Balm, and ibuprofen just to keep going. At the time, I thought my goal was to avoid pain. But pain wasn't the real problem, it was just a symptom. The real issue was my bad form, which caused the pain in the first place. This is exactly what happens with focus and attention span. Your goal shouldn't just be to sit down and focus for a couple of hours using tips and tricks. Your goal should be to have the innate ability to focus without relying on a million hacks to get you there. Think of it like this: imagine there's a graph with a wall representing distractions. If your baseline level of focus is low, you'll need all these tips and techniques just to climb over that wall and start focusing. But wouldn't it be better to improve your natural ability to focus so that you don't even need those techniques in the first place? That's the difference between a temporary fix and a permanent improvement. If you've been feeling like you need more and more tips just to get by, and those tips are becoming less effective, it's a sign that it's urgent to work on your foundational focus skills. Why is this so urgent? Because the second step to fixing your attention span is understanding the rules of the game. Let's dive into step 2, understanding the rules of the game. The rules of the game. Let's say that right now your innate attention span is pretty low. It's down here somewhere, and maybe you're thinking, it'll improve over time, or perhaps you just can't be bothered to actively work on it. Unfortunately, that's not going to work out well. The reason is simple: the game we're playing today isn't neutral. If you're not actively training your attention span, it's being untrained for you, just by living like a normal human being in today's society. Think about it. We're constantly bombarded with messages from multi-trillion-dollar companies that pour billions into figuring out how to hack your attention and keep it. Attention has become the new currency. Even I, as someone who creates YouTube videos, spend a lot of time thinking about how to hold your attention long enough for you to learn how to improve it. Ironic, isn't it? If you're not intentionally working on your focus, over time, it will only get worse. And when that happens, it'll feel harder and harder to overcome the distractions and truly focus on anything meaningful. Let me share an example. A few years ago, I had a student who went to extreme lengths to force herself to focus. She cleared out her garage, set up a desk, and made it the ultimate distraction-free zone. No laptop, no phone, just a textbook, pen, and paper. She'd even lock herself in and give the keys to her family. Every time she needed to leave the garage, like to go to the bathroom, she'd have to knock on the door and get permission. Now, credit to her for being so disciplined, but think about this: if it takes that level of control and restriction to create focus, how sustainable is that for achieving long-term, meaningful goals? If your ability to work deeply is limited to such a narrow set of circumstances, you're going to struggle with the bigger challenges in life. The good news is, you can train your attention span, and you should. In fact, you have to start training it quickly, because, as I said, the rules of the game are working against you. By default, your focus is being untrained. Your task is to reverse this process and train it faster than it's being eroded. So, how do you do that? That's where step 3 comes in. Strategies for improvement. When it comes to improving your attention span, there are 2 different types of strategies: short-term and long-term. You need to use both to achieve meaningful and sustainable results. Let me break them down for you. Short-term strategies are techniques and tips that temporarily elevate your attention span. These are like quick fixes to help you stay focused in the moment. On the other hand, long-term strategies are the ones that permanently improve your attention span, so you don't have to rely on those short-term techniques as much in the future. It's important to understand how these 2 work together. In this section, I'll explain the short-term strategies first. Rather than listing every single tip or technique, which I've covered in other videos, I want to focus on how to make short-term strategies truly effective. Because let's face it, just knowing a list of tips isn't that valuable. The real value comes from knowing how to optimize these strategies for your specific situation. Here's the issue with short-term strategies: there are a lot of them, and they don't all work the same way. Some techniques work well in certain situations, while others don't. And sometimes, the same technique might work one day but fail the next. It can be overwhelming to figure out which one to use and when. The good news is that there are only 2 main principles you need to focus on to make any short-term strategy effective. If a technique aligns with these 2 principles, it's likely going to work for you. Principle 1: prioritize deep work. The first and most important prerequisite for good focus in the short term is deep work. Deep work is when you're fully locked in on a single task, entering a state of flow where time flies by, and your brain is fully engaged. It's when you're operating at your peak level of efficiency, and focus comes naturally. As a rule of thumb, anything that promotes deep work will boost your productivity, while anything that hinders deep work, like distractions, will slow you down and lower the quality of your work. Even if it feels like you're getting more done, multitasking or dealing with constant interruptions will ultimately make your work slower and less effective. Research has shown that certain conditions need to be met to enter a deep work state. Without getting too technical, here's the checklist I use to consistently get into deep work mode almost every single time. Eliminate distractions, turn off notifications, silence your phone, and create a dedicated workspace. Set clear goals, know exactly what task you need to complete and define what success looks like. Time block your work, set aside uninterrupted time to focus solely on the task at hand. Prepare your environment, keep your workspace clean and organized to minimize mental clutter. Use triggers, for example, specific music, a timer, or even a ritual like making a cup of coffee can signal your brain to enter focus mode. By following these steps, you can create the conditions necessary for deep work and unlock your brain's full potential. In the next part, we'll dive into how to optimize these techniques even further and introduce the second key principle of short-term focus. Checklist for deep work. 1. Have a clear objective. Before you begin any session, make sure you have a clear objective. Know exactly what outcome you want to achieve by the end of it. Don't just block out time in your calendar with vague labels like study or work. Be specific. Define what you want to complete during that time. For instance, instead of just writing, study, write, finish outlining chapter 3 notes or draft the first paragraph of my essay. Also, try to keep your sessions manageable, no longer than an hour. Break your goals into smaller chunks so that after 15, 30, or 60 minutes, you can clearly measure your progress. This kind of specificity creates a sense of tunnel vision in your mind, giving your brain a focused direction to follow. 2. Focus on one task at a time. Multitasking isn't real. No one can actually multitask. People who seem good at it are just switching between tasks quickly. Every time you switch from one task to another, your brain pays a price called the cognitive switching penalty. This is the mental cost of shifting focus. It takes your brain time to remember where you left off, reset itself, and get back into the flow of the original task. If you're switching between tasks frequently, you lose a significant chunk of your working time. For example, if you work for an hour but switch tasks every 10 minutes, nearly half that hour could be wasted on cognitive switching. To avoid this, commit to a singular task during your session. Be clear about what you're trying to achieve and focus exclusively on that one thing. 3. Prep the hard stuff in advance. Big tasks can feel overwhelming, especially when they require a lot of unpacking or mental effort. If you're feeling stuck or intimidated by a large task, try preparing for it before your work session. Identify the part of the task that feels most overwhelming and do a little bit of prep work ahead of time, something light that doesn't require intense focus. For instance, you might plan out your approach, collect resources, or make a simple checklist. By tackling these smaller, less demanding steps beforehand, you're making it easier for your future self to dive in and get started. Think of it as a head start. You're reducing that initial friction and setting yourself up for success. This idea ties into the Zeigarnik effect, which states that our brains tend to hold on to unfinished tasks, keeping them active in our minds. By prepping even a small portion of the task, you create momentum and make it easier to engage when the time comes to fully focus. The Zeigarnik effect and planning. I might be pronouncing this wrong, but it's called the Zeigarnik effect. This phenomenon explains why the brain finds it easier to complete tasks we've already started. By starting that big, overwhelming task in advance, even just a small part of it, you activate this effect, making it more motivating and likely for you to finish the task later. Now, here's the final strategy, and it might sound a little strange at first: plan to start, not to finish. When you have a large, daunting task, your brain immediately sees it as a significant amount of work and feels less motivated to tackle it. Our brains are wired to look for shortcuts and avoid spending too much energy up front. But when you shift your mindset to just starting the task instead of focusing on finishing it, you trick your brain into engaging. By simply planning to start without committing to completing the whole thing, you lower the mental barrier to begin. Once you start, two things happen. First, it becomes much easier to overcome procrastination and dive into the work. Second, because you're now following the focus strategies we've discussed, like deep work, you're far more likely to enter a state of flow, where your brain operates at peak efficiency. Here's the interesting part: even if you don't finish the task, the work you complete in a flow state will be high quality and highly productive. And oftentimes, once you're in that flow, you'll surprise yourself with how much you can get done. For example, there have been times where I planned 3 hours for a project, thinking it would take forever. But because I followed this approach, I entered a flow state and finished the entire thing in just 45 minutes. Never underestimate how much you can accomplish when you're fully immersed in your work. To sum up, if the technique or strategy you're using helps you meet the deep work checklist and gets you into a flow state, it's a good one. But there's another critical principle to keep in mind: front-loading. Would you like me to elaborate on front-loading, or should I refine another section for clarity? Front-loading for success. A long time ago, researchers conducted a study on the brains of people with great discipline and motivation compared to those who struggled with distractions. Surprisingly, they found that the brain activity between these two groups wasn't inherently different. What set disciplined people apart wasn't their brain's innate wiring, it was their behavior. Specifically, people with strong discipline had a characteristic habit: they used their time in advance to set themselves up for success later. For example, if you want to go for a run, don't make it hard for yourself by hiding your running shoes or clothes in random parts of your wardrobe. Instead, place them somewhere visible, like on a chair near the door. You could even get dressed in your running clothes well before it's time to run. That way, when the moment comes, all you have to do is get up and go. The same principle applies to studying or working. Think about the resources you'll need ahead of time, which textbooks should be open, which browser tabs need to be ready, or what notes you'll need to reference. Clear your desk and set everything up so that when it's time to start, the only thing left to do is start. This strategy is called front-loading, and it's all about anticipating every step needed to go from not starting to starting a task, and doing as much of that prep work in advance as possible. One critical part of front-loading is removing distractions. Most distractions can be predicted. If you know you'll be working in a noisy environment, have noise-canceling headphones ready and pick out what you'll listen to ahead of time. If you know people might interrupt you, let them know you're busy, put your phone on Do Not Disturb, or leave it in another room. Here's the key: front-loading doesn't mean eliminating every single distraction in the world, it's about identifying the distractions most likely to affect you and addressing them in advance. For some people, that might mean a completely distraction-free environment, while for others, it might just be minimizing the big ones. The important thing is to handle these distractions far in advance. If you wait until the moment you need to work to start dealing with distractions, you're far more likely to procrastinate or lose focus. Instead, handle everything the night before, the day before, or even a week before. That way, when it's time to sit down and work, there's nothing standing in your way. All you'll need is a small push of motivation to get started. That wraps up the short-term strategy, front-loading. Now, let's talk about the long-term strategy and how it helps you permanently improve your focus and attention span. Training your focus muscle. Step 5. Train your focus muscle. If you've optimized your short-term strategies with deep work and front-loading, Step 4, it's time to address the long-term solution, training your focus. By combining both approaches, you can solve your focus and attention span issues permanently. Think of focus like a muscle, we'll call it the focus muscle. Just like training your physical muscles, you need to apply the right amount of load to build strength. If you went to the gym and only picked up a speck of dust, you wouldn't gain any muscle. The same concept applies to focus. To strengthen your focus muscle, you need to challenge it, not too lightly, or it's meaningless, but not so hard that it's impossible. The good news is that training your focus muscle doesn't require a gym membership. In fact, there are just 3 key components you need: target, time, intensity. 1. Target, what you're focusing on. To train your focus, you need a clear target, something to direct your attention toward. This could be a behavior, sensation, or task. A simple example often used in practices like meditation is focusing on your breath. Try this: take slow, deep breaths and focus solely on the sensation of air coming in and out. It sounds simple, but it's surprisingly difficult because breathing isn't inherently engaging. Within seconds, distracting thoughts will creep in. That's the challenge: it creates the load your focus muscle needs to grow. Each time your mind wanders, bring your attention back to your breath. At first, you'll get distracted frequently, possibly every few seconds. It may take a while to even notice you've lost focus, and once you do, bringing your attention back will feel like a struggle. But this is normal, and it's also where the training happens. Each time you return your focus to the target, you're completing a repetition for your focus muscle. 2. Time, consistent practice. The second key to building focus is time under load, just like with physical training. Each time you get distracted and refocus, that's a rep. A single rep might take 20 to 30 seconds, so practicing for 20 to 30 minutes a day can lead to significant progress within a month. But even if 20 to 30 minutes feels too difficult, starting with 5 to 10 minutes a day is better than doing nothing at all. The important part is consistency. Your brain needs enough exposure to this kind of challenge to rewire itself. And here's the thing, progress only happens when you push into discomfort. If you stop at the first hint of challenge, your brain won't adapt, and you won't see much improvement. This is why it's critical to practice long enough to reach that point of discomfort. That's when the real growth begins. 3. Intensity, the right level of challenge. The third element is intensity. The activity you choose should be simple but challenging enough to demand focus. For example, focusing on your breath is intense because it requires deliberate attention on something inherently mundane. This is different from activities like gaming. While games can hold your attention for hours, the intensity is very low because they're designed to be engaging. Focusing during a game is like lifting a feather, you're not truly training your focus muscle. To maximize intensity, choose an activity that demands effort to stay engaged. This could be mindful breathing, walking, washing dishes, gardening, or anything else that's simple but requires deliberate focus. The long-term payoff. If you commit to this process for 20 to 30 minutes a day for at least 30 days, you'll start noticing improvements. However, don't expect immediate results. Most people won't see significant changes in the first 2 weeks. That doesn't mean progress isn't happening, it just takes time for your brain to rewire itself. This process is proactive. If you want a life where distractions don't constantly derail you and your attention span isn't shrinking, this training is essential. By combining long-term strategies like training your focus muscle with short-term strategies like deep work and front-loading, you'll not only improve your focus today but also build the ability to concentrate for life. Plus, these strategies will help you evaluate any new tips or techniques you come across and determine whether they're worth incorporating into your routine. A short-term bonus strategy. If you're looking for an additional short-term strategy, try making your tasks naturally engaging. For instance, when studying, use colorful notes, incorporate visual aids, or turn the material into a game. The more interesting the task, the easier it will be to focus and slip into a deep work state. Conclusion: take back control of your focus. Fixing your attention span isn't about quick hacks or temporary solutions. It's about understanding the rules of the game and making intentional choices to train your focus muscle. By combining short-term strategies like deep work and front-loading with long-term practices that build your attention span, you can reclaim your ability to concentrate, block out distractions, and achieve meaningful goals. Remember, improving focus is a journey, not a sprint. Start small, stay consistent, and don't get discouraged. Every step forward, no matter how small, takes you closer to the life you want, one where you're in control of your time, your energy, and your mind. If this video gave you value, don't forget to like, comment, and let me know your thoughts. Your feedback keeps this channel growing and helps me create more content like this. Also, make sure to follow the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss out on the tools and strategies to level up your focus and productivity. Let's win this game together.